In the depths of space, the Galactic Council had long governed with supreme authority, overseeing countless star systems and civilizations. For millennia, they had maintained order and balance, their rules unchallenged. But when a small, relatively new species, humans, defied expectations and began to rise in influence, the Council took notice. Captain Brian of the human vessel Dauntless stood at the command center, staring at the holographic display. Beside him, Liam, his trusted strategist, voiced the concern they all shared. "Captain, if the Andromedans secure the Nexus, we won't stand a chance." The Nexus was an ancient artifact, said to hold untold power capable of reshaping the balance of the galaxy. Every major race was searching for it, but none more determined than the Andromedans, a powerful and ruthless race that saw humans as inferior and unworthy of galactic status. Brian nodded, eyes hard. "Then we stopped them from finding it. We sabotaged their plans." The room fell silent as Brian laid out the plan. Their mission: infiltrate the Andromedan outpost, destroy key facilities, and delay their search for the Nexus. They didn't have much time, but humans had always thrived under pressure. The team, composed of the finest from Earth's Space Force, divided into two groups. Brian, along with Ava and Teshi, was to disable the power core and data center, ensuring the Andromedans couldn't recover or communicate with reinforcements. Meanwhile, Liam and his team would target the research labs and communications hub. As they moved through the sleek, metallic halls of the Andromedan outpost, their hearts raced. Their stealth suits made them almost invisible to security systems, but the tension was palpable. Brian's mind flashed with images of Earth, his home, and the billions of lives at stake. The galaxy didn't believe in them, but humans had survived and thrived in hostile conditions for centuries. This was no different. Upon reaching the data center, Ava swiftly set the explosives while Brian and Teshi kept watch. Once finished, they proceeded to the power core, the lifeblood of the outpost. Sweat trickled down Brian's face as they planted the final charge. "We're clear," he whispered into his comm. "Regroup at the extraction point." The moment they boarded their shuttle, the outpost erupted into flames. Explosions ripped through the facility, and Brian felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. But he knew this was just the beginning. The search for the Nexus was only getting started. Back on their reconnaissance ship, Brian and his team gathered around the holographic display, analyzing the information they had recovered from the Andromedans' systems. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a search. The Galactic Council was preparing for war. "They've built an entire fleet," Liam said, his tone dark. "Warships, fighters, troop transports. They're gearing up for a full-scale assault to secure the Nexus." Brian stared at the hologram, his mind racing. The Council's military might was staggering. If they gained control of the Nexus, no force in the galaxy would be able to stop them. Humanity's survival, and perhaps the survival of countless other species, depended on finding it first. "We need to locate the Nexus before they do," Brian said, voice filled with determination. "And we need a way to neutralize their fleet. We can't let them win." The gravity of the situation settled over the team. This wasn't just about Earth anymore. The entire galaxy hung in the balance. They set course for the Zeta Quadrant, where the Andromedans had hidden a secret research facility. According to the data they had recovered, the facility housed critical information about the Nexus's location. But the journey wouldn't be easy. Time was running out, and the Galactic Council was moving fast. As they approached the Zeta Quadrant, the tension aboard the Dauntless grew. Every crew member knew what was at stake. Failure wasn't an option. They entered the quadrant undetected, their ship's cloaking technology keeping them hidden from Andromedan sensors. The team prepared to infiltrate the facility, just as they had done before. But this time, they knew the stakes were even higher. The search for the Nexus was becoming a race against time, and humanity had never been more determined to win. The hidden research facility loomed ahead, shrouded in darkness. Brian and his team made their way inside, navigating through the maze of corridors. The facility was heavily guarded, but their years of training allowed them to move swiftly and silently. Liam, ever the strategist, led them toward the archives. According to the intel, this was where the Andromedans had stored data on the Nexus. If they could retrieve it, they might finally have a lead on its location. As they entered the archive room, Teshi worked quickly to bypass the security systems, her fingers moving deftly across the controls. After a few tense moments, the data was theirs. Brian scanned the files. "This is it," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Coordinates for the Nexus." But just as they were about to make their escape, alarms blared. The Andromedans had discovered their presence. A wave of soldiers poured into the facility, weapons raised. Brian's pulse quickened. "We're out of time," he muttered. "Liam, take the data and go. We'll cover you." The team fought their way back to the shuttle, laser fire illuminating the dark halls as they cut through enemy forces. They moved as one, each crew member covering the other's back. Finally, they reached the ship, barely escaping as the facility went into lockdown behind them. As the Dauntless sped away into the blackness of space, Brian let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. They had the data. The Nexus was within their grasp. But the Galactic Council was closing in fast. The race wasn't over yet. The coordinates led the crew of the Dauntless deep into uncharted space. The Nexus was located on a remote planet, one hidden from the view of all major galactic powers for millennia. But now, with the Galactic Council closing in and every moment precious, Brian's team had to act fast. The planet, named Iridia, was a lush, jungle-covered world, teeming with unknown life forms, and cloaked in an energy field that scrambled most scanning equipment. The moment they landed, the sense of urgency grew. The Council's fleet was already mobilizing. If they didn't secure the Nexus, it would fall into the wrong hands. As they descended from the ship, Ava scanned the area. "I'm picking up energy readings, but they're inconsistent. It's like the planet's alive." Teshi, the engineer, nodded. "The Nexus is ancient. Who knows what kind of technology it's built on? We'll have to be careful." With little time to spare, the team set out through the dense jungle. The air was thick with humidity, and alien creatures watched them from the shadows. Every step forward was a risk, but there was no turning back. The Nexus had to be found. Hours into their journey, they stumbled upon ancient ruins. Massive stone structures, overgrown with vines and moss, rose before them. Strange symbols adorned the walls, symbols no one could decipher. "This is it," Brian said, his voice filled with awe and determination. "The Nexus is here." They approached cautiously, wary of traps or defenses. The energy readings grew stronger the closer they came. Deep within the heart of the ruins, they found it, a vast chamber with a towering artifact at its center. It pulsed with a faint, eerie glow, radiating power beyond anything they had ever seen. But just as they began to approach, a rumble shook the ground beneath them. Liam turned toward the entrance, eyes wide. "We've got company." The Andromedans had arrived. A squad of Andromedan soldiers poured into the chamber, weapons drawn. Brian and his team took cover behind the ancient stone pillars as laser fire erupted around them. The chamber echoed with the sounds of battle, the air thick with tension. "We can't let them take the Nexus," Brian shouted over the comms, his heart pounding. "Hold the line." Ava, Liam, and Teshi returned fire, their shots precise and calculated. Years of training had prepared them for this moment. But the Andromedans were relentless, their sheer numbers overwhelming. For every soldier they took down, 2 more appeared. "We're outnumbered," Ava muttered through gritted teeth. "We can't hold them off forever." Brian's mind raced. There had to be a way to tip the odds in their favor. He scanned the room, searching for anything that could help. His eyes fell on the Nexus itself, its energy pulsing in sync with the chaos around them. "Teshi," Brian shouted, "is there any way to tap into the Nexus? Can we use it against them?" Teshi's brow furrowed as she quickly analyzed the readings from her device. The energy field surrounding the Nexus. It's unstable, but if I can access its core, I might be able to trigger a feedback loop. It could take out the Andromedans, but it'll be risky. "Do it," Brian said without hesitation. "We don't have a choice." As Teshi worked frantically, Ava and Liam continued to hold the Andromedans at bay. The The battle grew more intense with each passing moment, the chamber filled with flashes of light and the sound of explosions. Finally, Teshi shouted, "It's ready. Get to cover." Brian gave the signal, and the team dove behind the stone structures just as the Nexus unleashed a massive burst of energy. The shockwave tore through the chamber, sending Andromedans flying and short-circuiting their weapons. When the dust settled, the Andromedans were either unconscious or retreating, and the team stood victorious. But their victory was short-lived. A distant rumble echoed through the chamber, the unmistakable sound of a fleet arriving in orbit. The Galactic Council had arrived. The team rushed back to the Dauntless, hearts racing. From orbit, the Galactic Council's fleet was descending, a vast array of warships, dreadnoughts, and fighters filling the skies above Iridia. The Council wasn't just coming for the Nexus. They were coming for humanity itself. Brian stood on the bridge, staring at the view screen, his fingers clenched into fists. "We can't fight them head-on," he said, his voice calm but filled with resolve. "Not with our ship." Liam stepped forward. "We could use the Nexus. It's powerful enough to take out their fleet if we can activate it fully. But we don't know what it's capable of." Ava countered. "We could destroy the entire planet, or worse." Brian's mind raced. He knew the risks, but they were out of options. If the Council gained control of the Nexus, there would be no stopping them. Humanity would be crushed under their heel, and the galaxy would fall into darkness. "We have to try," Brian finally said, meeting each of his crew members' eyes. "It's the only way." The team worked quickly, coordinating with Teshi to remotely access the Nexus's core from the ship. The artifact's power surged, its energy field expanding as it linked with the Dauntless's systems. Outside, the Council's fleet was closing in. The lead dreadnought, the Solus Imperium, began charging its main weapon, ready to obliterate the planet from orbit. "We don't have much time," Liam said, his voice tense. Teshi's fingers flew across the controls. "Almost there. Just a little more." Suddenly, the Nexus came to life. Its energy field flared, sending a shockwave through space. Council ships were hit with massive surges of energy, their systems going offline one by one. The Solus Imperium trembled as its power grid failed, weapons falling silent. The crew of the Dauntless watched in awe as the entire Council fleet was disabled, their warships now drifting helplessly through space. "It worked," Teshi whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. But as the team celebrated their hard-won victory, a low hum filled the ship. The Nexus's energy readings began to spike dangerously. The artifact was unstable, its power growing out of control. "We've got to shut it down," Brian shouted. The team scrambled to contain the energy surge, racing against time to prevent a catastrophe that could wipe out the entire sector. And in those final moments, humanity's ingenuity and resilience would be tested like never before. The Dauntless shuddered violently as the Nexus continued to overload, its energy readings spiking beyond anything they'd ever seen. Alarms blared throughout the ship, and warning lights flashed as systems began to fail. The sheer magnitude of power being unleashed was enough to tear the planet apart and take the Dauntless with it. Brian clenched the armrests of his captain's chair. His team had just disabled the Galactic Council's fleet, but the price was about to be much higher than they expected. The Nexus, now fully awakened, was spiraling out of control. Its unstable energy threatened to wipe out everything in its vicinity, including the planet of Iridia and all the nearby Council ships. Teshi's voice cut through the chaos. "Captain, the Nexus is overloading. If we don't shut it down, it'll detonate, and the entire sector will go up in flames." "We can't just turn it off, can we?" Liam asked, his voice rising with tension as he strapped himself into his seat. "I mean, it's not a switch." Teshi shook her head, her face pale with fear. "No, it's beyond that now. The only way to stop it is to stabilize its core, but we'll need to interface directly with the Nexus. And to do that, someone will have to physically go to the site." A silence fell over the bridge. The reality of the situation was clear. The person who went back to the Nexus chamber would be walking into almost certain death. "I'll go," Brian said without hesitation, rising from his seat. "No way," Ava interrupted, stepping forward. "You're the captain. You can't risk your life like that. We need you here." Brian met her gaze, his expression hard but calm. "If I don't go, none of us will make it. I'm the one responsible for this mission. I'll be the one to see it through." The room fell quiet again, but the resolve in Brian's voice was final. Ava, Liam, and Teshi exchanged glances, knowing there was no time to argue. They trusted Brian, and deep down, they knew he was right. Ava took a deep breath. "All right, but you're not going in alone. We'll be with you every step of the way, monitoring and guiding you." Brian gave her a firm nod, appreciating the loyalty of his crew. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Minutes later, Brian was suited up and on a shuttle, speeding back toward the surface of Iridia. The planet loomed ahead, its jungle-covered surface now pulsing with energy from the Nexus. The closer they got, the more unstable the atmosphere became. Lightning crackled in the skies, and strange, glowing fissures began to open across the landscape. "We're approaching the site." Teshi's voice came through the comms. "I'm picking up massive energy fluctuations. You'll have to move fast once you're inside." "I've got this," Brian replied, keeping his voice steady despite the storm brewing around him. "Just keep me updated." The shuttle touched down near the ancient ruins, and Brian wasted no time. He sprinted through the overgrown jungle, his eyes locked on the Nexus chamber ahead. The artifact's glow was now almost blinding, its energy warping the air around it. The ground beneath his feet trembled with every step. As he entered the chamber, the temperature soared and the hum of the Nexus grew deafening. The energy field surrounding the artifact was now crackling violently, arcs of raw power shooting off into the walls. There was no turning back. On the Dauntless, Ava monitored Brian's progress closely, her heart pounding in her chest. Teshi worked feverishly at her station, analyzing the Nexus's energy patterns and trying to find a way to stabilize the core remotely. "We're running out of time," Teshi muttered, her fingers flying across the controls. "If we don't stabilize it soon, the entire area is going to go critical." Ava opened the comms to Brian. "We're detecting a massive spike in the energy field. You're almost at the core. Once you're there, you'll need to manually interface with it." "I see it," Brian replied, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. Inside the Nexus chamber, Brian reached the core, a swirling vortex of energy contained within a crystalline structure. The artifact's ancient machinery was exposed, glowing with a strange, otherworldly light. It was unlike anything Brian had ever seen, a blend of organic and mechanical technology, far beyond human comprehension. Brian's breathing was heavy as he approached the interface, a control panel covered in the same strange symbols that adorned the ruins. His mind raced as he tried to decipher the alien language. "Teshi, I need help. These symbols—" "I'm on it," Teshi interrupted. "I've been running a translation algorithm, and I think I've got something. The symbols on the left correspond to power levels. The one at the top is stabilized, but you'll need to activate it while the energy flow is synchronized with the core." Brian took a deep breath. "Got it." The ground shook again, more violently this time. Cracks formed in the walls, and pieces of stone began to crumble from above. Time was running out. He reached out to the control panel, his hand hovering over the symbols as he watched the pulsing energy. Timing was everything. If he made a mistake, the Nexus could implode, taking them all with it. "Now, Brian," Ava's voice came through urgently. In one fluid motion, Brian pressed the symbol for stabilization just as the energy pulse aligned. The Nexus roared to life, its core glowing brighter than ever before. For a brief moment, everything stood still. Then, with a final surge of power, the energy field began to stabilize. The violent arcs of electricity calmed, and the Nexus's glow softened to a steady hum. Back on the Dauntless, Teshi let out a sigh of relief. He did it. Ava closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the tension in her body release. "We're not out of the woods yet. Get him back here." Brian stumbled out of the Nexus chamber, exhausted but alive. As he made his way back to the shuttle, the sky above Iridia began to clear. The energy storm dissipated, and the glowing fissures in the ground slowly closed. The Nexus was stable, and the planet, and the galaxy, were safe. The Dauntless picked him up minutes later, and the crew gathered in the hangar to greet him. Brian stepped out of the shuttle, his face smeared with sweat and dirt, but a tired smile on his lips. "You did it," Ava said, her voice soft with admiration. "We did it," Brian corrected, looking around at his team. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not just through strength, but through the ingenuity and determination that defined humanity. As they lifted off, leaving Iridia and the Nexus behind, Brian looked out at the stars. The galaxy was vast, filled with dangers and challenges, but humanity had proven that it could face any threat, no matter how great. They were not just survivors. They were pioneers, explorers, and warriors. And they were far from finished.